Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. So this video is about literacy development for early childhood. And so just talking about concepts and getting off on the right track. Basically the smoothest and most natural path to a strong literacy sense for your children. So first off, there's probably a bunch of ways that you're already developing literacy for your kiddos. Everything from songs and dances that you guys might do together, story time, print in the environment, if you're taking them out for a walk and you're noticing signs or other symbols, airplanes, logos, things like that, all building literacy sense for your child. What I want to talk about, what I want to talk about today is making that transition towards more of the formalized literacy development and process, and so where to go next or where to start. So some of you might be surprised to hear that I do not recommend, my own personal experience and personal view, I do not recommend jumping into alphabet names or alphabet knowledge, as teachers might refer to it. If your child is already well advanced in these other areas I'm going to show you, then that's something that obviously will be appropriate for them to expand into, and I'll talk about when I personally start to feather that into instruction and exposure. But initially, and there are some formal curricula that recognize that that in fact letter names and naming the alphabet or reciting the alphabet is a skill that becomes more useful a little bit further down the road. So then you might be asking, well, what's first? So the first thing I would say, the first thing that we try to use in our classroom is the children's sense of story and adventure and imagination, or even just story retelling. So something that happened to them maybe over the weekend, something that they're excited to share about. As teachers, we all know we bring up a topic, and if it's something that's relatable, like parents or children, younger brothers, sisters, what have you, their hands will shoot up because they're excited to share what they know. So it's really, at school, we're pulling from that experience and bringing it to the page. And so how do we do that? Well, the last stone that they're stepping from to their own story recording in a visual sense is actually the story times that I mentioned earlier. So the stories that you read to them, they might have a favorite story or a favorite author, a favorite character, but a story they're well associated with is a great reference point to get them into sharing their own ideas and stories on the page. So if their favorite story is Corduroy, the little stuffed bear who is at the department store, he lost his button, that type of thing. It could be Corduroy, it could be anything really, but you can reference that story and say, you know how somebody wrote a story for that bear, Corduroy? Well, I want you to do that with your idea. Now you want to catch them in a story retelling. So let's say they're coming home from pre-K or daycare, and they're talking about a new piece of work that they got to use. Let's say the teacher brought in finger paints, and they're really excited about being able to use finger paints, and they did a picture of an airplane, something like that. That is a great jumping off point, saying, you know what, I think that story would be perfect for the page. Do you remember when we read a story about someone like Corduroy and that little bear? Someone took that story, which was in their head, and put it down on paper. I want you now to take this idea that you've shared with me from your head, and let's put it on paper together. Now I say together because as one of their first times, they are going to need a lot of support. And so these are the ways, I'm just going to go through how we would support a story like the one that the example I gave, the hypothetical. So one of the first principles that we use with the children is that any work they do, whether it's from the art area or writing or anything else, that they associate it with their name, so that they basically are labeling their work as their own, and a teacher or anyone else will know whose work it is, who did that wonderful work. And so early on, I might do a video later on name writing and how to progress with that. For now, I would just say to expose them to it. You don't want to really get them bogged down on name writing early on if it's not a skill that's strong for them already, because it will get in the way of being able to get to that story and getting that on the page quickly. So as a teacher, say with a student who is not familiar with their name, I might expose it. First, just give them exposure. So I'd make a line at the top, kind of like that, and I'd say, we're going to write your name. And we say it often enough that if you pause at the end, they'll fill it in. So the first thing we write down is your, and they'll say name. So let's say in the case of a student, hypothetical student named John, he did not know his name yet. So I'll say, okay, John, let's see, John. Okay, here we go, John. Again, we'll talk more about name writing and learning your name. In a lot of cases, names are not phonetic the way they're spelled out. And so, you don't need to belabor the beginning sounds, but you can make reference to it. You don't have to. This is your name. We put it at the top because this is going to be your work. So you write the name, and then really for the first many weeks, we're just doing an illustration. So later on in the year, I'll use a template of paper with a line part towards the bottom and then some lines for writing below. So sort of a line that delineates the illustration from the print, and then line below to support and facilitate their actual transcribing their picture into written word. For now, this part's really not important. You can either leave this off or you can actually have it on the page, but I just wouldn't worry about it. And if they're over fixating on it, use a blank sheet, just write their name with a line like I made. Don't even put the lines down there, because you really don't want them over focusing on that until they can get the story in a visual sense using images. So, and I'd love to talk more. I can do a video on the evolution of language, and what we're doing with children from birth to actually when they're writing, what that process actually is sort of anthropologically, which is neat to me. Anyhow, getting back to just the nuts and bolts. So next is the illustration, right? So it's finger paints, right? So you can ask them things like, well, what were the finger paints in a tray? Were they in a bottle? And whatever they tell you, you can draw together. We want to just sketch it out. Again, we're modeling, so we don't want them bogging down on whether they're drawing an effective bottle of paint, what the bottle of paint actually looked like. We can help them drawing that. There may be some parts where they're really adamant, I want to draw that. There may be some other parts that are like, yeah, I'm not sure. Or you can already imagine for them that they're not going to remember how to draw it. Early on, you can draw for them just as modeling. A word of caution is that if you're moving too quickly and trying to do too much for them, and they're seeing how you as an adult do an illustration, some children may get frustrated with how when it becomes more their responsibility and they're doing more of the picture making, how the realistic nature of the picture looks. So if theirs doesn't look as realistic as yours, they could get frustrated with that. So if they are okay with doing most of their drawing, if they want to draw a bottle, let me see. If they draw a bottle and it looks like this, and that's their bottle of paint, of finger paint, hey, as long as they know what it is and you can label it later, and we'll talk more about that, that's good. So I encourage you to give them the time and be patient enough to sit with them and make enough time for you just to be present with them and let them get their own drawings down. But if they're really frustrated by it and we don't want that to get in the way of them conveying story, you could draw it for them. You could draw a bottle. Oh, okay, and you can talk about it. Well, I know a bottle is kind of like a rectangle shape, and then it has sort of like a little bit of a circle on the top to make like a top, and maybe the bottle, looked like that. Maybe it had some writing on the front, and maybe that's what a bottle looks like. And you can exemplar that. But in any case, so once you do the drawing, and I'm not going to fill out the whole story, but you can imagine it might be a classroom, there might be some classroom tables, chairs, an easel, or maybe it was done on the table. These are all questions to ask and details to add. And when it seems like they're kind of done with the image and you really want to move on to getting some of the word down. So first of all, just doing these stories with pictures and without necessarily any labeling is a perfectly appropriate and helpful first step. Eventually, and 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 not too long after, you want to start putting some words with the picture. And one of the first ways we do that is we embed right into it. So we don't write it separate at the bottom. That's not the first part of their language development. We want to basically pair some letters which represent sounds to the picture. So bottle, right? So if this was bottle, for example, after the whole thing was done, and let's say with John, we wanted to label bottle. So we'd say, okay, well, let's label the bottle part. Maybe you labeled other parts, maybe you haven't yet, but anyway, we're doing bottle now. So the way we do that in our class is we draw a line to it, and I like to put and make it into an arrow with an actual edge, a pointer at the bottom, so it's actually connecting. It's not just, you know, in both directions, but it's pointing to the illustration they made. And then bottle. So we would sound it out, right? Bottle, bottle, bottle. Notice I haven't talked necessarily about letter symbols, what they're called, basically the name of the letter, ABCs. We haven't done any of that yet. Bottle, 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 bottle. Ooh, I hear a ba. Okay, so then you write it down. You can write down the uppercase B, the lowercase b, whatever the case, but you're putting the b sound. Bottle, bottle, starts with a b. I hear that. And then maybe you'd go on to the next thing. Maybe this, let's sort of switch it up, and this was their paper, say. Instead of this being their drawing, let's just say, well, let me just make a sheet of paper. Okay, so then we're drawing the sheet of paper on the table. Ooh, paper. This is your paper. Paper. Oh, I feel my lips, how my lips go. Oh, okay. So I'll draw an arrow. We teach them how to draw an arrow. Paper. That's a p sound. Starts with a p. And you just draw a P. Okay? Just like this. You draw a P for paper. All right? We'll start with one sound, just the very beginning sound. And that really will mirror most school curricula. So if you want to make sure that it's a skill that is useful and can be measured by the school to measure their progress and to benefit, sort of, you know, chart the benefit of the work you're doing at home, it's perfectly integrated and synchronized with most curricula is. We draw an illustration for what we want to tell a story about, then we label it, we start discriminating the beginning sound of words first, the very first sound, and then after that you'll add, you know, an ending sound, paper, so at the end, you know, you might have a in there, and then you'll start filling in the middle sounds. But this all happens across a whole year in many cases. So but just this kind of labeling at first, great first step for literacy development for your children. As a fun celebration for this hard work, because really this is hard work for them. It seems oversimple for us, right? But we know they're just getting started. There's so much concept development for them, and so much of it is new, that this is like it's a real grind in many cases for them. Attention span, all of that. So what I like to do is save the coloring. Notice I just left it in pencil. I like to save the coloring for the end because coloring's fun for them. It's a little bit, it's not mindless, but it's a little bit of a brain break, as we call it, while they kind of just go over with the color they want. Oh, well, what color paint did you use? You can color that one in red, you know, if it was red, they'll color it in red. You don't have to think too much about it. You can ask them about colors while they're using it, but try to let this be just sort of the fun celebration part, as we say. And I'll do another video that talks about how we structure our work environment at school so that there's intermittent work periods and break periods, which we call celebrations for their hard work. It becomes a motivator, and it also just exposes them to discipline. And this is the way even adults structure their life, right? We go to work, we have a certain work period, and even during the day we take certain breaks to just relax and kind of recharge. And then at the end of the day we might celebrate by going home just to see our family, looking forward to our meal at home with our family, or maybe it's out. There are various ways that we celebrate our hard work, and that helps us be ready for the next part. We'll talk more about discipline and structuring and building resilience and extending work periods and that type of thing in another lesson. Anyway, so notice I did all of this without naming letters, without naming alphabet. All of this is about teaching them to think of a word, because this is let me just fast forward so you understand why I did it this way. Down the road, say second grade, third grade, they'll be writing a story and they'll say, oh boy, I forgot to put in about the mouse. I saw this mouse and the mouse went, eek. right? Oh, I want to write that. The mouse said eek. Or maybe the teacher will prompt them. Well, what did the mouse do or say? Whatever. It's a hypothetical. So then they either need to write mouse or they need to write eek. And so they've already written a certain portion. What they're going to be doing without any kind of visual or any copying down is they're coming from the word in their head. They see it in their head. And if they don't know the word yet, it might be a new vocabulary word that the teacher is encouraging, or that the student may have intentionally left out because they don't know the spelling yet, and they might not feel very confident in their sounding out skills. But that's exactly what the teacher or the classroom might demand, is that they're going to sound out mouse, mouse. And what they need to do first is hear the sound in their head. That's the very first step in their brain. Sort of, where does their brain go ping pong to get the written word out? Well, it first comes with saying the word, knowing the word, right? Oh, it's a picture of a mouse. I saw a mouse in the classroom. Hopefully not. Mouse. Then they have to listen to themselves say it, hear the sound, and then they have to know what that sound looks like, right? When they were doing bottle and they heard buh, eventually they'll know the buh looks like this. It looks like this. If you attach it too much to the name, and I have students who do this all the time, you say, oh, buh, buh, and they'll yell out, bee. Okay, well, they're doing two steps at once. Just recognize. First, they're hearing it. They're saying, oh, right, that's that letter that's straight line down, two curved bumps, and that's what makes the B. It's called a B. But the very first thing, I don't want them to skip past the sounding out. Why? Because there are some letter sounds that don't sound so much like the letter, right? Think about why. Children want to naturally think that Y makes the W sound, because that's how the name sounds. But of course, it's ya, right? It's counterintuitive. Same with W, right? We want the W sound. We say we're making a story about a picnic and we have watermelon. Well, and they're thinking wa. Well, if we've taught them all the ABCs first, and we say, watermelon, watermelon. Oh, I hear and feel the W on my lips. They'll say, why? The letter Y. Well, that would be incorrect, as we know. So that's why we don't want to front load a bunch of letter names. We want to work on what the sound is. So if there's anything that you want to sort of quiz your child on that's a little more sort of rote memorization or two-dimensional, instead of just singing the alphabet with them and showing them the letter when you say the name of the letter, A, B, C, D, instead of that, think about the sounds. Ooh, apple, apple. You could, in fact, you could even have cards, a picture of something with the beginning sound letter on the back. So you could have a card with an apple. Apple, apple, what sound? They go ah, ah, ah. And then you say, oh, good, and turn it over. You're right, ah, as you're pointing to the A. But you're not necessarily calling it A yet. That can come after. That can come after. And the names of the letters, obviously, they have their utility. But it's interesting. You might be interested to think about. I didn't actually use the names of the letters for any of this. And if your child is strong enough with sounding out all the sounds, the beginning sound, the ending sound, most of the middle sounds, which we call inventive spelling, that doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. We don't want them memorizing the spelling of words, not initially. We want to build their sounding out first. Then we'll do the letters that need to be what they call sight words, that you just need to memorize, either because they can't be sounded out, the way that they're spoken is not the same way that they're written, or because they're just frequency words that they need to memorize, learn to memorize. That's fine, but that has its place, but that's later. So we first want their sounding out skills to be excellent. And we do that by knowing the name of the picture or idea we have, listening for the beginning sound as we say it, feeling it on our lips, and then knowing what that symbol looks like that goes with the sound. And they could potentially be writing words, writing sentences without learning any of the letter names. You can't say it in the reverse. You can't learn your ABCs alone without knowing the sounds of the letters and really write much of anything. And I have had some students whose parents taught them essentially to memorize print, memorize words, simple words, complex words. And if you came in pre-K and you tested, baseline testing, they actually would score very high because letter names are emphasized on a lot of standardized tests, and they could tell you what a lot of words are, but only because they memorized them. When they go to actually write a story from their own words, and they start getting into vocabulary they're not familiar with yet, they not only do they struggle, but they're completely confused. They don't know that they, oh, say watermelon's a new word for them. It's a pretty long word for pre-K. So they get to watermelon, it looks like they're reading on a second grade level, and then they want to write a story about a picnic, and they get to watermelon, and they don't know how to spell it, and they might be writing, you know what they often do? They'll write another word they've memorized. So waterfall, window, windmill, they'll just start writing words that don't even make sense because all they know about language and story development is memorization of words. That is actually a really tough concept to deconstruct. That can be really counterproductive. So you want to make sure there's a lot of phonetic activity and learning the phonemes or the sounds of the words, the sounds of the letters first. I hope this was helpful. We'll do some other videos. I know this one was a little bit long. We'll do some other videos, but I hope that I've given you enough to get started. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to engage in some back and forth to explain more or to clarify anything that was confusing. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Hey everybody, just one quick addition. I forgot to mention the pencils we use when we're working with our 4-year-old students in terms of what's developmentally appropriate for them. Just a quick word, some families are inclined, we've done pretty well getting rid of them in early childhood, but inclined to use the jumbo pencil, just thinking that it might be better for pre-kindergarten. And so we just want to let you know that what we use are a small pencil, like a golf pencil. Some know it from like golfing, but you can also just use the ends when pencils get really short. Just take off the eraser part and give them this section to use. That way they can practice their pincher grip down at the bottom, but it's not so big that they're either trying to hold it from the top like this very much, and they're definitely not grabbing it. It's not quite long enough for them to be inclined to grab it in a fist. That's the problem with the old sort of jumbo pencils, is it encourages a fist grip where you're kind of moving the pencil this way. And of course, that's not the fine motor skill we want them developing on. So nice small pencils, the shorter the better. And they just pinch it right at the bottom where the wood is and right away. So, oh, no erasers, right? Because at their age, what we find is that the children are observing other writing or the print in a text and assuming that their print needs to look like they see in a book or they see grown-ups do. And so we want to alleviate that for them. What I tell them is if they write a word in a way that they want to try again, that's perfectly fine. Just put a line through it and write over or below it, over it in their next attempt. But I also encourage them and let them know that they're not supposed to be able to write like they see grown-ups writing. It's not supposed to look the same at this point. They're just learning. And that there is a time in the day for practicing their letter writing, but story writing is not really that time, so it's okay if it doesn't look perfect, as long as they know which letter or sound it is, and they can sort of read it in that respect. They can read the letter to us so that we can figure it out. All right, like I said, feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that, and we'll see you soon.